Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Season 2 dungeons coming in The War Within. It was recently, yesterday, released the exact dungeons that we will have for Season 2. Obviously, some of these were already known. There was actually only 2 that weren't announced yet. Just to get that out of the way, the 2 that were not announced are Operation Mechagon and Theater of Pain. So we have it's Workshop for Mechagon. If you remember, there's 2 versions of it. There's the inside and the outside. So this is the Workshop, and then Theater of Pain from Shadowlands. So I put together this like little graphic here to kind of just show you. Just made it as easy as possible, just kind of like overlaying it over the actual dungeon journal thing. We didn't have the thing for the new Goblin Dungeon, but that's what this Goblin picture is here. And then we'll go through each of these dungeons. I was going to kind of do them in like the War Within, then the 4 new. I think it might be interesting. I'll just literally do it in this order that it's in now. And I want to go through each dungeon and give my thoughts on it, give feedback, perhaps, about what can make it better. Obviously, we don't know much about this Goblin Dungeon, so this is going to be complete conjecture and, speculation on that one. So let's go ahead and start with this Goblin Dungeon since it's right here. So this is just, again, this is not the Goblin Dungeon picture. This is just a picture that was from the video or whatever that they released about the Goblin Dungeon coming in 11.1 in Season 2. And I think it's called like, it's something about to do with a floodgate or something like that, where they're trying to flood the city or something. That's like what the dungeon's about. So obviously we don't know much about this dungeon at all, but what we do know is that it's full of goblins. And so typically in World of Warcraft, whenever there's goblins, there's usually a lot of them, right? Whether that's Venture Co., whether that's any of the cartels, whether that's Booty Bay, whether that's, goblins that are in the dead mines even. Like goblins are typically lots of goblins together, especially if like you even go all the way back to classic dead mines. That room with all the goblins, and they run and pull more goblins, and goblins always run and get more goblins. And we have another dungeon in the Motherload that we'll talk about. It's kind of the same thing. So what I expect to see from this dungeon is for it to be very dense with mobs, which generally is a good thing. That usually kind of like promotes different routing or different pulls you can do, or just really big pulls you can do. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more in some of these other dungeons as well. So I imagine that could be the case. I also imagine the artwork's going to be great in there. Just seeing the stuff from 11.1 in the video, the artwork for this goblin place looks absolutely amazing. And so like it'll probably be like a cool place to be in. It'll probably feel pretty immersive. I know that's not what everyone cares about with Mythic Plus, because at the end of the day, you want to time your key and stuff like that. But that being said, there are, first of all, there's only so much we can know about it. And second of all, like, it does feel nice to be in certain dungeons compared to others. Like some dungeons, you just don't want to be in them. They look bad. They're not fun. They're cramped or whatever the case may be. And I think this dungeon might be very aesthetically pleasing. Obviously, that's just conjecture. That's just speculation based on the video thing that they put out. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic for this one in particular. But I could be completely wrong. Maybe it could have another thing we're going to talk about is a bad mechanic. And it could have a bad mechanic and it could ruin the whole dungeon. So I'm optimistic for it, but obviously we don't know anything yet. Probably won't for like another month, at least a month or 2. And then there'll probably be some testing and stuff on the PTR, and then we'll know a lot more about it. Up next, let's talk about Cinder Brew Meadery. So this is a War Within dungeon. So if you did Mythic Zeros and stuff at the start of expansion, you probably did this a decent amount. If you leveled up with dungeons and you did a decent amount. Cinder Brew Meadery is actually, the best way I can explain Cinder Brew Meadery is that it's very similar in feel to the Stone Vault. Obviously, you're in a different setting, right? Again, the setting of Cinder Brew Meadery is actually pretty cool, but it's very linear. You have to double back and stuff, just like in Stone Vault, but it's very linear. It's very like, do this wing, then do this way. It's very much like that. So you have a big old room of trash in the start with a boss in that room. Then you go down a hallway, bunch of trash in the boss. Hallway, bunch of trash in the boss. They all double back into that main room, the 2 hallways, and then you do like the final boss, which you ride a bee up to the top to do the final boss. So what this is, well, I actually like Stone Vault for the most part, especially when you can do the big pulls or whatever. And Cinder Meadery definitely offers that opportunity. So it's going to be like probably a big old pull with Lust or something at the start. That's just a guess. It might not be that way when it actually goes live. But like a big old pull at the start in Cinder Meadery, and then do boss, and then you could save some of the trash to do with the boss. That's going to be a little bit more high level, but you'll have that, and then again pulling hallways, maybe as much of the hallway as you can, and then pull the rest of the trash into the boss, like things like that. There's going to be opportunities for that. Obviously in pug keys, which is mostly what I do, right, we're not going to be doing stuff like that crazy, but I do like to see what you can do at the highest end as well. And so Cinder Meadery has like that Stone Vault potential, which I thought was fun to play this season for the most part, as a dungeon that I had to farm for a trinket. I thought it was pretty fun to play. And then I thought it was actually really fun to watch in the MDI as well. I thought Stone Vault was pretty good. So Cinder Meadery is going to have that feel, and I think it's going to be a pretty well-received dungeon. Boss fights will be what the disclaimer here is, all the boss fights will need tuned properly. The trash will have to make sense, right? But assuming tuning, I think otherwise it'll be fine. Let's move on to Operation Mechagon Workshop. So Mechagon, this is unfortunately, we've had a lot of Operation Mechagon since it came out in BFA. I believe this will be the 3rd season we've had Operation Mechagon Workshop in our dungeon pool. I actually speculated that we would have this dungeon, not in a video, but like privately to my guild, that we would have this dungeon in the dungeon pool, because it just kind of made sense. I know it's like gnomes, but it's like tinkery stuff, engineering, and it kind of made sense to be in this goblin patch, even though again it's not goblin related. It's goblin adjacent, and I kind of speculate about it. I actually don't mind either of the wings of Operation Mechagon. I think the inside is the more likable wing overall. There's some stuff about it I like, there's some stuff about it I don't like, but it's generally well received usually when it's in the pool, but it's just been a lot of it. And somebody made a good point that I can't remember who it was like on Twitter or something, that because nobody like worked on the Faded season in Shadowlands, like that was just a few devs that put that together, and like they might not even realize that Mechagon was in that Faded season as well or something, and they might not even realize that this is the third time this has been in the rotation. And so that will be a little bit annoying to some people, because it's a liked dungeon, but it's not like a beloved dungeon. So it is the good news is it is all solved and everything. Since we've done it so much, like it should be pretty well in most of the player base's mind. Obviously people take breaks during expansions. Some people didn't start until Shadowlands or didn't start until Dragonflight. So it's not like everyone's going to have played it a lot, but a good amount of the player base will have played it a lot. So again, generally positive with Operation Mechagon, and I've been generally positive on all of them. However, the next one I'm not going to be generally positive about, and that's going to be Dark Flame Cleft. So when I was first doing all the dungeons on the not on the PTR, on the beta and everything like that, I walked into most of these new dungeons and I'm like, these are great. This is really cool. I love the scenery. I love the aesthetic. I love kind of like the way the bosses are conceptually. I loved all these things. And that's what I thought of when I thought of this. But Dark Flame Cleft was the only dungeon that when I did it, even on whatever regular heroic difficulty or whatever on beta, Dark Flame Cleft was a dungeon where I said, oh no, this is going to be awful in Mythic Plus. The other dungeons, all 7 other dungeons, I didn't even think about Mythic Plus. Okay, that should tell you something, because that's like, okay, I'm just kind of accepting that, okay, if you tune it right, these will be good on Mythic Plus. Dark Flame Cleft, I was like, oh no. So if you don't know Dark Flame Cleft, there's, I think, multiple points in that dungeon where you have to like do a flame mini game where you have to like keep a flame lit on your cart. I think it's twice during the dungeon that you have to do this, and it's very annoying. If it's not twice during the dungeon, it's like during the cart, and then during a boss or a mini. It might be during a boss fight you have to do the candle. It's just very annoying. It's not cool. It's gonna be a pug killer, right? So this is what I meant earlier about talking about a mechanic that's bad. So the dungeon outside of that is actually pretty good. I actually like almost every other part of the dungeon other than that. And why is that? Well, because in a real good group, it won't matter. Your healer or somebody will just do the flame stuff. You won't have to touch it. It'll be fine. But in like a pug group, you have to have somebody in your group say, okay, I'll do all the flame crap. It needs to kind of be a ranged player or a healer because you have to run around and do it. If it's a melee, your damage is going to be super low. The key's going to be harder to time, all this kind of things. I would just hope that Blizzard makes this mechanic easier to do on Mythic Plus than what it was on regular, right? Because the difficulty of a key of a dungeon should not be in the minigame. It should be in the boss. It should be in the dungeon itself. That was the whole argument against some of these affixes that were like, okay, the affix is the hardest part of the dungeon. Why is the affix the hardest part of the dungeon? The hardest part of this dungeon, especially in pugs, will be doing this candle stuff correctly. And they need to nerf that. They need to make the candle stay lit longer, make the radius bigger, things like this. If they don't do this, it has a potential to be a absolute hated flop, I would say. And I'm not normally negative at all. Like I view myself as a realist actually. So sometimes I'm negative, but it's more like just being real. And that's what I'm doing here with Dark Flame Cleft. I'm just kind of being real with it. And if you like the candle ability, that's fine. But what I'm telling you is, when you get into Mythic Plus doing it in competitive, like not competitive, like as far as they're really good, but just like these people who are like, oh, I really want to time my key, and then somebody's messing up this candle thing, it's going to be obnoxious and toxic, honestly. So that's my worries with Dark Flame Cleft. That would be like my feedback here is please make the candle stuff easier and less impactful than what it currently is, even on the easier levels of dungeons. Next up, we'll talk about Priory of the Sacred Flame. So this was my favorite dungeon when I first was doing dungeons in the War Within, and it probably still is. The aesthetic of it is so cool. It looks so nice. It's great. It's like modern day Scarlet Monastery is what I called it, and it's also potentially good for Mythic Plus. So you'd be right to point out, and I've seen some people point out that, especially like the Paladin mobs, they drop this giant consecration, and it does a ton of damage. Obviously, that'll need to be tuned correctly. It's also very annoying as a melee, just in general. But obviously, that does need tuned correctly. You can't just be dying to one tick of a consecration. That's kind of weird. We also have consecration. I'm a rep paladin. I have consecration. My consecration doesn't tick and kill you in one shot. So, like, there needs to be some sort of reckoning there as far as that in particular mob goes. But this is another very densely packed dungeon, especially at the beginning part. Now, once you get into the church part, you just kind of have to go straight. But the outside part, there's a lot of optionality there. There's a lot of potential. You're probably going to have to pull a lot of that trash anyways to get count or whatever, I'd imagine. And normally when that's the case, right, because they don't want you to skip the entire courtyard usually, normally when you have to pull a decent amount of it, that means each mob is actually going to be a little bit weaker because they understand they're going to have to pull stuff together to be able to time the key. That's how they're balancing thing. It's like balancing like a card in Hearthstone. Like, okay, this thing needs to be subtracted by 2 attack because it doesn't fit in the correct profile or whatever. That's kind of the same way that they have to do like trash in Mythic Plus or anything in Mythic Plus. You have to factor in the time it takes to kill it. You have to factor in how much count it gives, efficiency scores and stuff like that. And so this has a potential to be really, really cool. Now, do I think it's going to be epic to do with your pugs? Maybe not, but this has potential to be like an amazing thing to watch, like on the MDI, with how big of a pull they might be able to do in that courtyard in the opening area. And also, it might be something where you do pull a ton of mobs with Bloodlust as you enter the Mythic Plus, even in a pug. Like, what I always go back to is in Talzavesh, I think that's what it's called, in Shadowlands, the Mega Dungeon. The one wing of it started with the Murlocs, and even in pugs, you would pull 4 or 5 groups of these Murlocs together, and that was a fun pull, man. It made you feel like you were in the MDI, and that was a fun pull to do. And I hope we can see something like that in the Priory. That's like my best case scenario, is that we have like this huge pull on start, because I think it'd just be cool if that's the case. And I hope they tune it that way to where it's able to be done. and that you do need to pull a lot of trash, and it's possible to pull a lot of trash. There's the paladin mobs that probably need work, and then there's a lot of like bow, like ranged bow people that is really hard to group up. That might need some sort of logic changing on them, because there's also not a ton of places to line of sight them. I don't know. Like we'll see. People will come up with interesting ideas for it for sure, and there are potential places to line of sight, especially if you can pull big enough. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm very, very optimistic about Priory, and basically if we're able to do a really big pull on start of dungeon, I think it'll be a cool dungeon. And that's kind of like is easy. It's like it's simple, but that's kind of all that needs to happen there. Next up, we're going to talk about Motherload. So the Motherload, I actually was back in there recently. What was I doing in there? I can't remember. I might have been like looking for. Hold on a second. I might have been like looking for. I didn't want to AFK out. A secret or something for the secret finding, but I was just recently in there. Now I didn't do a ton of Mythic Plus in BFA when the Motherload was active, but like BFA was when I first started doing any Mythic Plus. I basically touched it as little as possible in Legion, and then I did a little bit in BFA until I got like my Azerite pieces, and then just stopped each season. But the Motherload, the few times I did it, I actually didn't mind the Motherload. I liked the bosses in there a decent amount. I know the last boss is a little bit annoying, but I actually liked most of the bosses in the Motherload. And also, it's a very I know the last time I ever did Motherload on Mythic Plus, I was with a really good group, and the way we pulled it was so fun. We pulled a bunch of big packs, and it was like after it was just like in an MDI, and like we pulled a bunch of big packs, and it was actually like really well executed, and I had a lot of fun. And like that one last dungeon, I realized is like the one that's in my memory, and maybe I had some bad ones before that, but like again, there's just like a ton of big pulls you can do in there. And I, like I said, the last boss is a little bit annoying, but other than that, the bosses are pretty cool to me at least. And so like yeah, I'm actually kind of a fan of the Motherload, and I'm very optimistic for the Motherload as well. The only one I haven't been so far is Dark Flame Cleft. Motherload makes sense thematically, goblins everywhere. Like this is the one that was 100% going to be in this patch. Everyone knew that, and I'm super optimistic about the Motherload. So yeah, I pretty much have like, it's like, okay, maybe the last boss is a little bit annoying, but like we were able to do it before. We're all much better players pretty much. So I don't think it'll be that big of an issue. I'm pretty much looking forward to the Motherload. Next up, we have the Rookery. So this will be the last of the War Within dungeons. Very similar to Cinder Brew Meadery and very similar to Stone Vault in that it's very linear. Now in this case, it's like go straight, then jump down, go straight, then jump down, go straight, then jump down. There's not a lot of twists and turns. There's not a lot of optionality. I imagine you're probably going to have to pull most of the trash, just like in Stone Vault, just like you probably will in Cinder Brew Meadery. The first boss is a little bit annoying for melee, especially, when we're first doing it, it takes longer to kill. That will be a little bit annoying for melee. If you've done it on Mythic Zero or Heroic, whatever, you probably kill the boss too fast to kind of understand maybe why that first boss would be so annoying. But the first boss might be annoying, but it's a solid dungeon. It's like something I've advocated for was having easier routes for tanks, so tanking isn't such of a burden for people who want to try tanking out. Like it's a burden to have to like memorize all these routes or come up with your own routes and stuff like that. So when it's just kind of like hold W, sometimes that's a good thing, even if it's not as fun for the player always, for like the DPS. Like you need a tank in your group, so we also have to cater to them too. So yeah, I could talk more about the Rookery, but the Rookery is very similar to, I would just be repeating a lot of stuff from Cinder Brew, honestly. So those two I view very similar, and in a good way. They're very much like Stone Vault, very, very linear, very cool bosses in my opinion. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well. And then the last one will kind of be the only other one that's a little bit negative, and that's going to be Theater of Pain. So that's from Shadowlands. So by the time Shadowlands came around, this is when we had a vault. So I started doing a lot more Mythic Plus because I needed to fill my vault. All of a sudden, Mythic Plus became highly lucrative to do as a raider. And so I was doing a lot more Mythic Plus. So I did a lot of Theaters of Pain. So anything Shadowlands on, you know, which is only 2 expansions, but and then the first season of War Within. Anything Shadowlands on, I have a lot of knowledge on, Mythic Plus wise. And so for Theater of Pain, you know, I remember that dungeon to be pretty easy to time. Now, maybe I'm crazy or whatever, but I remember, like, I don't remember the dungeon being super fun, but I remember it being super easy to time. Like, often being able to, like, 2-chest a pug of whatever the max key was for your gear back then. I can't remember if it was like, was it like 18? Was it 16? I don't even know. Back before the squish and before everything. But I remember it just being super easy to time Theaters of Pain. So it'll probably be kind of a free key, similar to Mist of Tierna Scythe. Obviously, they'll probably tune that up a little bit, maybe. But this key was pretty easy. Now, what's annoying about this dungeon to a lot of players, and you know, something that I've harped on a lot of these, is you can do big pulls. You can do big pulls right before the boss, big pulls into the boss. Theater of Pain is very like, no, you can pull 3 mobs, and you can pull 4 mobs, and you pull these 2 lieutenants. And there's a couple places where you can do big pulls, and they certainly do that in the MDI and stuff. But it's a little bit harder for pugs to do big pulls in there. And so, you know, this is one I'm not negative about. We already kind of know what Theater of Pain is. It's pretty easy to time, and it's pretty set forth of how you do it. So I'm not really negative on Theater of Pain, but I am just kind of like moderate on it. It's like, it is what it is. You know, it has at least been an expansion since we've seen it. It's not like Workshop where we've seen it 3 times. You know, it's coming back, and yeah, I'm not too negative about it whatsoever. Just kind of moderate on it. I'm not excited for Theater of Pain, but I'm also not like dreading it at all. So that's where I'm at with that one. So I just wanted to go through, talk about every single dungeon here coming in season 2, get my takes, give my feedback out there way before it's even live, because I think that's interesting to do. So that'll be it for this one, guys. As always, I do ask to subscribe to the channel, because that helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody have a good one.